Le cheval plaît beaucoup, hein. C'est un vecteur de communication extraordinaire.
Avant d'être un cavalier, c'était important d'être un horseman.
Always put the horse before the personal ambitions.
Vraiment un cheval incroyable.
Voilà quelqu'un qui est champion olympique et qui n'est pas ordinaire.
Se remettre en question et peut se servir des défaites pour être meilleur après.
Ce feeling, je l'ai eu directement avec Caleb.
On fait du haut niveau, il y a le côté financier, c'est comme ça.
Aller en compétition parce qu'il est bon, pas parce qu'il paye une table.
Moi, je veux pas courir mes chevaux pour l'argent.
If you can do it in a way that doesn't take too much out of your horses.
Quand on voit l'évolution en 10 ans de temps, qu'est-ce que ça va être dans 10 ans?
Pouvoir motiver les jeunes à aller au bout de leurs rêves.
Forme de très très bons compétiteurs. Je ne vais pas dire que ça forme des hommes de chevaux.
Pour moi, les bons moments, ils sont à venir.
Aujourd'hui, réussir sa vie, c'est avoir la vie que l'on souhaite.
It was a beautiful day in Wellington. We had an appointment at her stables and were a few minutes early. As we were approaching the address we had been given, we saw her. She was riding a horse along the road. She was probably returning from a hack along the sandy tracks of Wellington. She dismounted to greet us in the middle of the yard, smiling and looking at us with a frank, direct and kind gaze. Margie Engle is small in stature, but when you meet her, you immediately understand that a strong and grounded personality had taken root in this tiny woman. You must then listen to her tell her life story. Margie recounts amusing anecdotes from her teenage years spent with horses, the foals she broke in, the Arabian horses she rode, the difficult horses she tried her luck with. Her career is a perfect reflection of her strong character and daring spirit. At 67, she continues to ride for the American team and embody American show jumping style. We set up our microphones and 3 chairs under a small round pergola at the edge of the large grass arena, and in the shade of this adorable little flower-filled cocoon, we recorded an hour-long conversation with Margie Goldstein Engle. Together, we talked about ethics, success, longevity, and how to behave well on horseback, but also in business. We hope you enjoy this episode, and we are counting on you to help us spread the word by sharing it on your social media, and you can leave a comment below the dedicated post. Margie Engle, hello. Nice to meet you. We're very, very happy to be here and very grateful that you're welcoming us here in your barn. You have set up the whole, the chairs and everything in the cutest area, in the cutest setup ever. So we're just in between your sand arena and the grass arena. This looks absolutely adorable. So I'm going to introduce you. I don't want to be too long because the whole point is for you to be able to talk about this story and to tell this story. Margie, you are one of the biggest name of the US jumping team. You have been here and around for decades, representing your nations, competing in Olympic Games, Sydney. You claimed the team silver medal at the FEI World Equestrian Games in Aachen 2006. You're a 3-time Pan American Games medalist. You also won a team gold medal and individual bronze at Santo Domingo Games, and recently you also was a member of the 3rd place team in Sopot in the 5-star Nations Cup. I'm sure I'm missing many performances and results that you've had, but what we can say is your name is in the very middle of everything that deals with equestrianism in the US. Is that correct?
I don't know if it's correct or not. I've been around a long time. I've probably been around longer than most of the other riders and been doing this a long time. Been very fortunate to have a lot of nice horses and a lot of good owners. So I've had a lot of horses that were able to compete at the top level.
Could you maybe introduce this conversation by telling the story? This story, where has it all started? Where do you come from? What kind of childhood did you have? And how did you get immersed in this equestrian world?
Well, it's kind of an odd story because I'm not from a horsey family at all. I actually never owned a horse. When I was a junior, I never owned even part of a horse till I was maybe 25 or 26. My parents knew nothing about them. One of my best friends from elementary school, when I was like 8 years old, I went to the stable with her. I always loved animals, and I always loved sports, and it seemed like a great combination of both. In kindergarten, they brought a pony by for us to sit on, and I was immediately in love with it when I was 5 years old, but we really didn't have any stables near where I lived. And my parents, I'm from a very academic family. I have 2 older brothers, and one ended up being a doctor and the other an actuary. And my parents were nothing to do with horses. My father was a CPA and my mother a school teacher and then a principal, so they were more into the school system. And I was always a tomboy, though, because I had 2 older brothers, so I loved to kind of roughhouse and play football and do all kinds of sports. But once I fell in love with the horses, I was obsessed. It was just a passion, and I begged my parents to take lessons. At the farm I started at, where my friend Andrea was riding, they had both a riding school and a boarding stable and show horses, and they had a dog kennel and a cat kennel. And when I was 8 or 9, I was too young to groom the horses. So instead of grooming the horses for extra rides, when I begged my parents forever to be able to ride, they said they could afford 1 lesson a week, but it's an expensive sport, so I wasn't able to do more than that. So I begged the people at the stable I told them I'd do anything. I would work in the dog and cat kennels in exchange for extra lessons. And as I got old enough, my parents would laugh that when I came home and said, "Oh, they let me clean the horses' stalls now." Once I was around them enough that they weren't worried that I was going to get hurt, I started grooming the horses, which I much preferred to the dog and cat kennels. I love dogs and cats, but dog kennels are not the nicest to clean out. Dogs eat things they're very messy. The cat kennels are easy to clean out, but the dogs are quite messy. And I also just was obsessed wanting to be around the horses. So as I got a little bit older, I think when I was maybe 12 years old, they saw how obsessed I was and how passionate, and they needed someone. I was always a bit of a daredevil, and I didn't mind falling off. I fell off plenty when I started. Ponies are very smart, and they know how to drop their shoulders to dump you. They know all kinds of tricks, so they needed someone to break. They also bred and raised horses and ponies, so they needed someone to break the young ponies and horses. And when I was 12 years old, I started breaking and riding horses and ponies for them that were for sale. And they would also buy lots of horses off the racetrack to retrain and sell as hunters and jumpers. And I also did anything I could do to ride horses. The Kramers would laugh. They were kind of like second parents to me. They said, if we asked you to ride a donkey, I think you would get on it. But I didn't care. The tougher the horse was, the more of a challenge it was, and anything that no one else wanted to ride, then I got to ride those. So I would much rather actually get a young horse that had never been broken to train than the race horses off the racetrack, because to retrain them is actually way more difficult, because they're so in tune. They're trained differently for the racetrack. They don't know anything about leg, and they're trained when you pull to pull back and get faster. And then when they would hear the speakers at the horse show, they would get all tense thinking it was a race. But anyway, I loved breaking the young horses and ponies. And with my size, because I'm so small, they used to want to get me into the race horses. But I did gallop a little bit just to earn some extra money and to be able to take more lessons. But I was never really into the race horses. I always liked jumping, and I just was always drawn to the hunters and jumpers. I did a little of everything, though. I did everything from people at the barn had some Arabians, and the Arabians sometimes did some jumping classes, and I would go to some of the Arabian shows and show in some of the Arabians. We taught them to jump, and same with the quarter horses. But anything and everything I rode. And like I said, the Kramers were second parents. I used to spend the night there, and they had 3 daughters, and they all rode also, and they all loved riding, but they weren't as obsessed with it as much as I was. So they were thrilled that anything I would ask, anything they'd ask me to ride, I rode. So the horses that were in the riding school, when they learn they can get away with things from different people that are beginners riding them. So if they needed to be retrained a little bit, then I would get on and school them. And other people that worked at the farm, Bibby Farmer, who's a trainer for a long time, and Karen Harnden, and a lot of other trainers that were at the farm would hire me to ride and make up ponies for their clients and junior hunters. I did a lot of catch riding for people down in South Florida. So when I started, I probably rode anywhere between 40 to 70 rounds a day of hunters, mainly hunters and jumpers. But the hunters do a lot of times back-to-back classes. But my heart was always more in the jumpers. But I started like a lot of people in the hunters and ponies and the equitation, and it was always on catch rides though that I did all those classes, and the Kramers, ponies and horses I learned from an early age, they were always for sale. And that was probably the hardest thing when you would get a little attached to them. And the ponies I had known since they were born there. And we did everything they were very easy to break because we drove them in carts. We drove them around in the pony carts, so they learned to steer, and they would learn to kind of be voice trained. You tell them to trot or walk, and they were, by the time we got on them, they were very easy to break. It was the ones usually that people had sent us to break that hadn't been worked with that much on the ground. Those were the ones that were a little more difficult. But I learned a lot, and I was very fortunate to have a lot of good people there that worked with me. And the Kramers paid for me to be in clinics. When I was young, I took clinics with like George Morris and Michael Page. And anytime anyone in South Florida, I'm actually originally from Miami. I'm one of the few people that moved north to Wellington. But whenever there was a clinic anywhere down South Florida, they would pay for me to go in it on one of their horses or ponies. And I also rode for a lot of different trainers down there, and they would help me with the different horses and ponies I rode for them. So with everything always being for sale, it was very difficult. Like I said, you get attached, and everything I had that was a little bit nicer that could probably move up the level in the jumpers would get sold. So at one point, I had a horse named Daydream that a dealer had sent me from Germany. And he sold a lot of horses in America. He would bring anywhere between 10 to 12 over at a time to sell. And he said, and he saw me, I think, in Virginia showing another horse that was very difficult named Puck W that nobody else wanted to ride it. He saw me showing him at Culpeper, and he said, if she's desperate enough to ride that horse in the jumpers, I think she would probably like, he thought his horses were quite a bit nicer. And he asked me to start riding Daydream when he was about 5, and he thought he could do the jumpers. So he sent him to me and a bunch of other horses that were all sale horses that got sold. And when Daydream started as a 6-year-old and 7-year-old, I didn't know any better, but the dealer wanted him to do the bigger classes. And as soon as he started doing the bigger classes, there was a lot of attention, and people wanted to buy him. So I was really desperate to hang on to one that could do the Grand Prix level and not sell him, and he was a good age. So my father actually used his business background, and he helped bring me to, I was, I think, 25 at the time, or 24 or 25, and I had gone to business school also, but I wasn't as far along and know as much as my father did. But he took me to a lawyer to get a prospectus made to do a limited partnership so I could sell shares in him, so I could maybe keep him for a little bit longer, not always have to sell him before I could get to the Grand Prix level. And it was very beneficial, and they put in what they could, and at the time I put everything I could in that I had raised up to that point, because I had learned to save from a very early age. And so we put a group together, and they bought Daydream, and that was the first one I was able to keep for any length of time. And the first year, I think as a 6-year-old, when he started doing the Grand Prix, he won 4 Grand Prix his first year doing the Grand Prix. And as a 7-year-old, he went on. I showed him on the team. We used to have a horse show. We had an indoor circuit. We had Madison Square Garden, Washington International, and Toronto. It was a whole circuit, and you had team classes. And France used to send over a team, and Germany did at times, Sweden, Mexico, Canada always had a team. But anyway, that was the first time getting to compete on the team. And once I started to get more recognition in the jumpers, because I had always ridden a lot of hunters at that point, then different people started sending me other jumpers. And some other people that had sale horses, another man, Jacob Friedis, who owned tons of horses, he sent me, he'd always buy them as yearlings, 2-year-olds, and he'd watch them free jump, and he left them in Europe, and then when they turned like 4 or 5 or 6, and they looked interesting, he would bring them over, and he sent me quite a few of those, so I'd make those up, and he had quite a few nice ones that ended up doing the Grand Prix with Salute and Sebastian, and he had a horse named Nimidor that Anthony won Grand Prix on, and he had a lot of, he was either great at picking them out or was very lucky, but he had a lot of top horses that I was able to compete at the top level, and just by word of mouth I started riding for different people and started getting more and more Grand Prix horses, and back then there weren't as many people doing it, so I had probably between 10 and 16 Grand Prix horses that I could show all over the country. And it was great. I could put them at different places, and the owners all wanted the top ones to go to the more difficult shows, and then we had some Midwest Grand Prix that were a level down, and they could do those. So people were happy. The horses were making some money, and they were getting sold, and they would buy new ones, and we just kept turning them over. And that's a little later when I started riding for Hidden Creek Farm. They actually have the farm next door to me until he was with me over 25 years till he just passed away actually a year ago. And now his farm, since it's been sold, but they had a lot of top horses, and he did breeding of young horses also. But just kind of word of mouth, different people started sending me new horses, and I was fortunate to have so many that I was able to do the AGA. We had an American Grand Prix Association tour, and I won my first car. They gave a car away for the Rider of the Year, and I was very excited about that because my parents never thought this was something you could make a living at. They thought it was a great hobby, but they really didn't know much about it. All they knew is they were afraid that I was going to get hurt because I was too much of a daredevil, and I did tend to take a lot of risks. And because they were a little nervous, as a lot of the horses I rode at the beginning were pretty difficult. So when I started getting nicer horses, they were much more relaxed, and I did go to college, so I had something to fall back on, and so I did have some educated idea about how to run the business, because the riding part is the easy part. It's learning to run the whole business and organize the shipping and organize the hotels and the grooms and everything from the airplane flights for the horses and the people and the help everywhere, ordering the feed and hay, and it's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that people don't see. So even though at the time I loved school, but I wasn't so thrilled about spending so much time in school. I was glad I had later, because it really did help me with the business, and plus I had something to fall back on in case I did get hurt badly enough that I couldn't continue, or you never know when something happens, and you want to have something to fall back on.
Margie, I would like to know who you are. Everyone says you are a front character of the sport, that you are daring, hardworking, and courageous. I know that you've broken just about every part of your body, and you should never have been able to get back on a horse, but you did everything you could to make sure that wasn't the case. Is that right?
Well, I was told many times I shouldn't ride again, but I've always been a little stubborn from the time I was young. When I first started riding, everyone said, because you don't have the financial background and you're not really the correct build to be a rider. I'm more of a build for a jockey, not to do show jumping and equitation and things. But I've always been a little bit stubborn, so it's kind of like the more people that tell me I can't do something. It just makes me work that much stronger at it. And one of my trainers, Karen, always said, just take the word can't out of your vocabulary. There's no such thing. You just have to learn to work around it. And if they tell me that I didn't want to hear can't, just tell me I'll work through whatever I need to. If something's broken or it may take a little time, I need to do more physical therapy, or I need to learn to do something else or get another part of my body stronger, then I never thought that I couldn't do something. Luckily, my parents always taught us from an early age that even though they weren't horse people, they taught us that if you want something badly enough and you have a passion and are willing to work towards it, you can accomplish almost anything. And I think that's always been in the back of my head. And I guess as far as being kind of silly and having a sense of humor, I got that from my father.
We heard that.
Yes, I can't tell these kind of jokes today, but my father had a great sense of humor. His were much more proper than mine, I guess. He did a lot with play on words, and he was very quick-witted. He was very sharp, but I remember at our dinner table, you had to kind of listen. His sense of humor was very quiet and more a play on words, and but I guess I got my sense of humor from him, and I just love being around them at the dinner table. And my parents had a great relationship. They always, he tried to explain to me that from an early age too, that how important family is, and having, you need to have something to keep you grounded. And it was kind of nice that they weren't involved with the horses, because at dinner time we talked about other things and learned to be not, because it was very easy to get one-sided, because that's all my friends and I did is talk and do horses all day long. My parents used to laugh that we would never walk anywhere or run anywhere. We'd gallop and canter. We just jumped all the furniture, and now kids have all those special jumps. We just jumped whatever was in the house. But I guess I get my sense of humor from him, and I think the stubbornness and the willingness to work I got probably from both my parents, because they always worked very hard for what they wanted. Family always came first, but they were really hard workers, and whatever they wanted to accomplish. I remember even after my mother having all three of us kids, she wanted to become principal, and she went back to school to get her master's and doctorate so she could become a principal, because she had taken teaching jobs before so she could be with the kids when we were younger and she was raising us. And when I first started, actually she taught at the elementary school I went to. So I was always a little bit mischievous, so I didn't get just in trouble at school. She would find out when I was a little bit of a class clown and got in trouble for that, for telling jokes even at school, or I was always kind of high-strung, a little hyperactive. So I, just from talking too much or doing more mischievous things, I got in trouble. But I always said it wasn't fair, because other kids would just get in trouble at school. My mother would find out, and I'd get in trouble again at home. I think the thing that probably kept me from getting in bad trouble was the horses, because when I did get in trouble at school or got a check in self-control, or my conduct could have been a little bit better, because school was always very easy for me. Scholastically, things went really well, and I was always on the honor roll for that, but my conduct I was a bit of a clown. So when I got in too much trouble there, they would take a lesson away or a riding day away. So that was, for me, devastating. And I remember begging them. I said I was going to lose my job at the barn if they did that. And they said, well, you should think of that before you get in trouble at school. So I think that probably helped me take a little better path. After elementary school, I tried to stay more in control. Probably, when I was younger, a lot of it was just being hyperactive. And when I was riding so much, that took the edge off, I think. Me riding, whatever I did to excess. Whether it was, when I was younger, I played softball, and so I got better. I would be at home practicing throwing the softball in a tire, and so I could learn to pitch better and aim better. So I ended up getting to be captain of my team in softball. And with tennis, I would practice on our garage door every day to excess. And same, I was on the bowling team, and everyone else would want to bowl 2 games or 3 games, I would want to bowl 6 or 7. So whatever I did, I tend to overdo. So with the horses, same thing. It didn't matter how many they asked me to ride, I would want to ride more. And it's just something I always thought practice makes you better. So I would try and over practice it so I would learn to get a little bit better. And I think the more you're around horses, the more you develop a horse sense. And there's so many different personalities. And I really think later that helped me. All those difficult ones I had starting out, they taught me a lot. And then when I got the nicer ones, I didn't appreciate it as much until I was a little bit older. I didn't want the easy ones at first that everybody could ride, because that was not a challenge. But the ones that dumped me all the time or dumped people or were difficult, those were the ones I wanted to see. The ones they said, the Kramers even said, don't mess with that pony anymore. She's dumped everybody. Kid's much bigger than you. Well, that was the one that was my favorite. That was a pony named Garnet, and I still remember her. And Mrs. Kramer said if I could stay on during a whole lesson, we had a stand where they would sell Cokes and different drinks, and she said, I'll buy you a Coke if you could stay on through a whole lesson jumping. So I was so excited when I learned to stay on, because she knew how to drop her shoulder when she'd stop at the jumps. So when she was finally champion at 3 shows in a row, they sent her away because they didn't want to sell her to anyone because they knew she was difficult. But after she was champion, they did send her away. So the other ones they sold, but they didn't want to sell one that was a stopper, because they knew as soon as someone would come try her, she would stop and dump them. But it did teach me to ride other ponies that were stoppers. I learned you had to take a little deeper seat and not, to ride a little bit differently. So each one, even if they were difficult, I ended up learning something from each one.
We had this conversation, a group conversation 2 days ago at WEF. We recorded an episode to talk about the differences between the US education system and the European education system. And I think it was Marie Engle who stated that the main difference is that in Europe, the riders would ride young horses a lot. They would ride a lot of young horses, so they ride and they learn the ability, or they get the ability to adapt, to not fall, to find a way to. And this looks like the way you were educated riding horses, and this is quite uncommon in the US, because many riders would just import horses when they are already 5, 6, 7 and not ride them, not break them in, but also not ride them when they are 3, 4 the first time in the ring. So do you think it's the main strength that developed your riding and that helped you perform the way you did?
I think absolutely it helps you develop a horse sense. I think if you work with horses from a young age, you learn to see how they think. We had worked with them at the barn. I mean, I can't imagine asking a kid now that's 12 or 13 to start working with a young horse. From the beginning, they taught us how to lead, how to groom them, how to put them on the cross ties, how to load them in a horse trailer. The Kramers taught me everything, and we had to do all of that way before we even got on their backs. So we developed a lot of horse sense on the ground with them, working with the young horses, and there's no better education than doing it. And that isn't normal for our country, like you say. It's something I think people do more in Europe. And we had to ride a lot more by ourselves and not always have someone standing over you telling you what to do. I remember when I would go to a clinic, I was consumed by it. I would try and study every single thing they taught us, and we would read a lot of books. And I used to offer to groom for free just so I could go to the top horse shows and learn from people by the rail and watching them warm their horses up. And some of the top riders, I would sit and watch Rodney Jenkins and Michael Matz and all these top riders, and Conrad and Joe work with their horses and go to the ring. But a lot of what I learned was from the books and just doing the different clinics and whatever. I would watch not just, when I was in the clinic, but when they gave to other people, because each person has a different problem with their horse or something else to work on. So we wouldn't just worry about what was being said to ourselves, but learn from what other people's mistakes were and what they did correctly too. So I think definitely it helped me working with the young horses, and it really helped me getting sent a lot of horses when I was starting out, because when I was starting in the business, no one was going to send me the top horses that were already made up. I got either difficult ones, or a lot of breeders would send me. There were a lot of breeders in the U.S. that didn't have anyone to send young horses to. So they would send me their young horses to break and show and to sell. I'd worked for numerous, and that's how I started with Hidden Creek. And it grew into a relationship where, while he was trying to breed Grand Prix horses, then the money he made with buying and selling horses, he would put back into, take his initial investment out and put back into buying other horses, and then we were able to get nice horses. But for sure, the first probably, I don't know, till I was well into my later 30s, all the horses I had, I developed from the time they were babies on. And the ones that looked like they were going to be Grand Prix level horses, the owners or the dealers that sent them to me, those they would price a little bit higher, so they took longer to sell. But everything I had was for sale. And they mainly hired me to ride those, or ones that were difficult that they wanted me to ride for the junior amateurs to help set them up for them, either in hunter classes to set them up for them, or jumper classes. But I think riding different horses helps you think more how each horse thinks. And there's a lot of things that when you get a new horse, this is something I did with one a long time ago that worked, and you try that. But you can't, it's not always one system that works with every type horse. You have to kind of learn to think how they do, and if one thing doesn't work, you got to try something else. So I think it's a big advantage with the Europeans that they do get to ride all those young horses, and they do get to ride all different types. And you also learn when you're working with young horses, most of the bad problems and things that they develop are something that you're doing, because you're starting with a clean slate. When you get a horse and you break them from the beginning, they want to do everything correctly. 95% of them usually do if they're handled correctly. So if they start doing something wrong, you have to think back, I'm probably doing, either I'm going too fast with them, or I need to slow down what I'm doing with them, or they're getting bored, I'm doing too much with them. I need to do a little bit less, or just different things. You learn to think how they think. The ones that are more sensitive maybe can't take the drilling quite as much. And the ones that are a little bit lazier, you have to ride a little bit stronger. But you have to change your approach depending on how each one's personality is. And you're not going to always get sent the same horses. Now when kids start, I have students, this one rides a hot horse or a more sensitive horse better than a cold one. And this one rides a cold one better than well, we didn't have a choice. You rode what you were sent, and you had to learn to make it work. If you didn't, you weren't going to get sent very many horses. And that's how I started my business, and it wouldn't have gone for very long if I only accepted just the good ones. I wouldn't have got sent the good ones starting out, because I was new and I was starting out my career. And through the ones that other people didn't want, when they started doing well, that's how people started approaching me with some nicer horses, and sent me a lot of nicer horses through developing some of the ones that weren't as nice.
You've lived through the generations of equestrian sports. I'm sure you saw the evolution, you saw the multiplication of competition, the money, the evolution of the education also. Can you tell us how you see the equestrian sport developing, and what do you think of the equestrians nowadays?
I think there's a lot of good things in the direction it's going. It's growing in leaps and bounds. There's a lot more people involved in equestrian than there used to be. When I started, I think one of the things that's a little bit of a shame, I think everything's gotten so expensive, it makes it very difficult for people starting out that maybe don't have a ton of money, and we're trying to develop new systems like some they do in Europe with the Young Riders Academy. Here we're starting to try and do something with Road to the Top, where people that maybe aren't able to have the funding to get to the bigger shows and get that education, where they have that opportunity through Laura Kraut and Katie. They're doing that program, and I think it's a little bit similar to that program like they're doing with the Young Riders Academy in Europe. And like you were saying, I was just talking to Katie, one of the things that she did with one of the riders she got was during the break, she sent him over to Europe to someone that used to work with her to go and break some of the young horses, because he had ridden up to Grand Prix level, but had never ridden young horses or developed a young horse. And that's part of your education. It's like now they all want to skip elementary school, junior high, and high school and go straight to college. And it really is important to have a strong basic knowledge about the horses. And I think it's a shame that we're losing the horsemanship part of it. I know even my own students, there's a lot of them that wouldn't know how to put a bridle and saddle on a horse, or a wrap, or if a horse had a big leg, or if it wasn't just right. I mean, I think it's important to be around them even in the barn. I mean, you learn how they think, and you kind of can get ahead of things if they aren't feeling just right, if they're not eating, or they don't look totally comfortable, or if they have a little inflammation. I mean, when we were kids, we would stay there when the horses got shod. We'd watch the blacksmiths and try and learn from them everything from what they were doing and the different angles of the horses' feet. And we also were around the vets all the time, and you try to gain as much knowledge as you can. There's nothing wrong, and you can always use it somewhere. And I just think it's a shame we're getting far away from that. I think the money is great to have in the sport, and there's getting to be more and more prize money, but I just hope it doesn't get too much away from the horse itself and what's important. I think with so much money being offered, sometimes people look at that ahead of the horses, and even with their training and the show schedule. You can go to a show every week of the year nowadays. I mean, back when I started, there were fewer shows, and you would try and get your horses to peak, and they would get much more breaks during the season. Now you have to actually really think about what times you're going to give your horses a break, because there aren't any breaks in the schedule.
And about the sport, when we met Eric Navet 3 years ago here in Wellington, he told us that Quito was an excellent horse at the time that he will still be today. And you talk about Daydream. Do you think that this horse would also be a superstar today?
I think he would be a good horse. He did a lot of things like puissance classes, and we had something called the International Jumping Derby. He was very brave with all those big solid jumps, and he was very careful, but not, I think more some of the other horses like Salute too, was a stallion I rode, that he was extremely careful and fast and more of a modern type. He would have probably been a better horse. He still to this day, he could, and I think he still holds the record. He was AGA Horse of the Year, HSA Horse of the Year. He had won something like 15 Grand Prix in a year, and that was when there were barely any Grand Prix. But he was one of the smartest horses I've ever ridden, and I think still today he would be careful enough to do well in the sport. I think you need a very modern type, light on their feet, quick thinking, very adjustable, very, very careful. Before, years ago, like when you're talking, what he was saying, even though, and Quito was an unbelievable horse, but some of the horses back then were scopy. And the jumps, even if you watch the courses from years ago, they were heavier material and deeper cups. And I think the jumps actually were bigger, but the courses maybe weren't as technical, and it was much lighter material. We didn't have so many planks that if you just breathed on them with upside down cups that would come down. And the material is very, very light now, and the cups are very shallow, and you didn't have all the breakaway cups. But they were big, solid jumps, and you needed a brave horse and you needed a scopy horse.
We've talked about you with various people since we arrived in Wellington at the beginning of the week, and every of them defined you as a horsewoman. I'd like to know, what is your own definition of a horseman, a horsewoman?
It's a hard thing to define. I mean, there's so many variables that are involved with being a horsewoman. I think first and foremost is putting the horse's needs first, and that's very difficult to do as a rider because you get caught up with the competition and everything, but you have to think like they do and think what's best for them at the moment, and bring them along according to what is best for them. If you want to go to a show next week and there's something not right with the horse, or it's a little too early, then you need to back down a little bit, and you need to learn to work with them, like I said, around the barn. Just think how they think, and and watch their mannerisms. People say they can't talk, but they speak volumes. I mean, there's so many different ways that they try and talk to you. And they tell you when they're happy. The biggest thing is trying to keep them happy and comfortable and enjoying their job. I try and do, I really think less is more. I try and once the horses reach a top level, do things that they enjoy. Take them out for trail riding. Take them out of not always working in the ring where they get kind of bored. And it's like a person going to the office every day. You get a little bit stale if you do the same thing all the time. I try and do as little jumping as possible so they kind of look forward to it. It's something that's kind of they're more interested in. And I'm not saying with the young horses you do that. You have to teach them a little more and do a little bit more. But once they know what they're doing, you want to just keep them happy and healthy. And I try and do everything possible, even if it's something that it's not 100% that it's going to help them. But if it might make them a little happier and a little more comfortable, then I do it. Whether it's the chiropractic or the acupuncture, or I own just about every machine there is, and if it's not going to hurt them and it might help them, we have something called the pulse, and I use it on myself, and I always feel better after it. And I've had to do a lot of physical therapy, like you said, through a lot of accidents. So the things that have helped me, I try and do to them also. I know when I'm feeling more comfortable, it's easier to do things. So the main thing is to keep them as comfortable as possible, to really keep an eye on their shoeing and how make sure the angles that are correct, the blood work, and make sure that their white cells not down, or their just their thyroid. If they get older, just testing things like Cushing's. Make sure just kind of trying to be a little bit preventative and check everything you can possible. I probably check them out way more than I do myself, but I just think it's more trying to keep them as happy and as comfortable as possible. And even if I really want to go to another horse show and I don't think that they're in the right frame, I try and back off. I know it's a hard thing to do, especially with clients when they're coming certain weeks, but if it's not ideal conditions, it takes a half a second to destroy their confidence in you, and takes a long time to build the confidence. I think the best partnerships I've had with horses are where we both trusted each other so much, and there wasn't, like with Salute, I asked him to do things he probably never should have done, and he never said no, and he never didn't try when I was in the ring. He'd turn himself inside out to try and miss the jumps, and he would do everything he could, and if I thought something, he was doing it. And then you have a really good partnership. And a horse named Perrin that I had that went to the Olympics, and he was probably one of the sweetest, but he was very naive horses you could be around. But because I knew he was so naive, and he had a ton of scope and a ton of ability, very careful, very scopy. He did it really easily, but he was so trusting and so innocent. You could even see in his eye he loved everybody. But you can't break that trust. You have to. It's like with people, if they're going to trust you, you make sure you don't lie to them and ask them to do things they can't do. So it's just keeping that bond and trying to think how each horse thinks, and just trying to do what's best for them.
The second thing that Michael told us is, if you rest, you rust. What does that mean?
Like I said, if anything, when I was growing up, I was kind of hyperactive, and I think too, it's just like that's why hopefully a lot of the older horses I have go for a long time. Indigo went till he was 20, Perrin went till he was 20, Royce went till he was 20, and they all stopped when they were still healthy and in good shape. But I think if you do kind of totally stop, even when I'm resting, like I just gave Deacus and some of the other Grand Prix horses a couple months off, took their shoes off. And I know it's a big thing, a lot of people show without shoes, but not all mine can go without shoes. But just let them be a horse. But I never really totally stop with the horses either, because I think when you totally stop, things seize up. It's just like yourself. If you totally stop, everything's going to seize up, and you're going to lose your feel, and as you get older, just like with the horses, it takes longer to get fit. And you stop moving, and things seize up, then it's not so easy. It's a good idea to rest, but you got to keep moving, do different exercises. I have to exercise way more now and work out, do more physical therapy than I did 20, 30 years ago. I mean, the older you get, the more important it is to stay in shape. And I think the same thing with the horses. And like I said, when I do stop with them, I still try and keep them moving also. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but
it does.
But I think it was just different way in language maybe that you put it.
Margie, you are still riding, still successfully competing. Is this a duty to keep inspiring young riders? And more of that, it's your duty. Do you think it's a duty to be an ambassador of your sport?
I think the sport has given me so much, and I've been very fortunate that you try and give back. I think that the fact I'm still riding, I just really am passionate for the sport, and I love what I'm doing. And as long as I have some horses that are capable of doing the top level, I would like to do that. And as far as being someone for kids to look up to, I think it's more important how you present yourself and that you never forget where you came from and how you started, and treat everyone the same. And a lot of things we get away from, it seems like, is treating everyone the same and staying grounded and being polite, even to the in-gate people or the people that work around the horse shows or people you run into anywhere. I think it's, it's important to try and help people out no matter what level they are. I don't know that I do that consciously for someone to look up to as far as still riding. The riding, it's definitely not at the same level as it was a few years back, but I do it because I still enjoy it, and I don't think I definitely don't go as fast as I used to and ride as many horses, because I don't know that physically I could do that quite the same. But as long as I'm able to do it and I stay out of the horse's way and they're not complaining too much and be competitive, then I try and keep doing it for that. And for the younger generation, I just hope to try and set an example that it's important, your integrity and how you treat the horses and how you treat other people. And you got to treat people with respect, and the horses also.
Nicolas Payot said yesterday when we talked about you, and he recommended us to contact you. He said that doing business with you is also taking the standards higher. That he said, like literally, when you work with Margie, you want to do so well because she's just so right and so correct and so fair in the way she does business, that you just want to live up to that standard.
Well, Nicholas is at a high standard the way he is to deal with also. So, but I do try and deal with people how I would want to be dealt with. And my father always had a high standard ethically of how he did business, and I try and, that's something you can't control. You can't control so many things in our business, and sometimes, unfortunately, horses are living, breathing animals. You can't always control what they're going to do, but you can control what you do and how you do business and how you act. And I think it's very important to be correct and to teach the new generation to be correct, and Nicholas is a great example of that. That's why people come back. I was taught years ago from different dealers that I dealt with, and I tried to teach it to some of my other people that wanted to be in the business. You got to think long term, not what's going to get your business done right then, but long term, why people are going to come back to you, because they know that you're honest. They know you try and do the best job possible and find them the right horses and be correct with them. And the more you try and do things that way, the more people stay loyal to you. And as far as both clients and with people that are buying horses, I mean, I've been very lucky, but I think a lot of it, they've been good to me, but a lot of my owners have been with me. I have people here that have been with me over 30 years. And I think that the more that you treat people correctly, and the people I was riding for when I was starting out, when I was a young kid, they were like that. They were just really good people and very honest. I think honesty is an underrated thing that should, it is a quality that we should all strive for.
We have a few technical question for the end of the interview, because the people who listen to the podcast asked us to be able to learn something a little bit more, technical. So the first question is, do you have tips or a method to walk a course?
I just walk. Usually, if you have time, you try and walk through the course at least once and just get the idea of it. And if there's any questions, then I walk the course again. But you also have to walk it in mind, if I ride more than one in a class, what the horse is strided like, what the course walks like for that particular horse. If it's got a bigger stride, then you might leave out a stride on one line. And if I have one that jumps better off of a shorter stride, or it's maybe a smaller, hotter horse that I would add a stride on, what places that you can add a stride. Because I had a horse named Hidden Creek's Alvaretto. He could do the leave outs very easily, but he would get flat if I did the leave outs. I remember down here there was an in and out line that was right by the in gate, and it walked kind of a forward 5 to a tight vertical 2 stride. And I knew with him, he didn't care about the in gate, but a lot of people say doing the 5, and then the 2 got so short they barely fitted in. And so with him, I would do the add. I did this. He was small, and he could have done the 5, but I took the risk of him maybe doing 1 in the 2, or at least having one down from getting flat. But then I had another horse in the class who was a big horse that had a bigger stride, and he got down there easily, and for him it was easier to do the 5 strides and then fit the tight 2 in. But it really just depends on the horse that you're riding, and you have to look at the turns, what you can risk for that horse, that particular horse and that rider at that point in their career, and where you can go a little bit tighter back to the jump, where you can go a little wider, what jumps are maybe a little bit spookier. If it's a young horse, you go in the ring and maybe I'll show him, walk through and think he's going to be a little spooky. This wall has black. A lot of horses don't like those black tunnel type things under the jump, so I'm going to let him see that once first. Or there's possibly a shadow in front of a jump, or anything new. When they came out with the new aqueduct walls, I actually got some also, because the first time the horses see it, they weren't sure whether to go over or under. And same with the bicycle jumps. I have a bicycle jump because that, when they first came out with that was something new. But you just go in and let them see it once first, because you have to remember, the first time they see the course is when they walk in the ring. But it really just depends on the individual horse and the individual rider. But I think it is important, if you have the time, to walk the courses as much as possible. And it's also good to kind of think in your head where I'm going to take a little bit of extra time, that I need to give my horse time to think and myself time to regroup, and where I can shave off a little bit of time, because nowadays the time alloweds are so tight, so you can't linger on the ends of the ring. But you don't want to surprise the horse and rider by turning too sharp to something that's very difficult. So when you're walking, you have to think of those things too. It's just a lot of different variables, but the more you walk through it, it's almost like you've ridden it once or twice already, so you're already a little more relaxed about what you're thinking. If you it's second nature what the course is and where you're going. The students I have that usually have the biggest problem, that they're there rushed and haven't walked the course and don't really know where they are. I have some of my students that get the courses online the night before, if they have the first class in the morning, so they can look it over, so it's fresh in their mind, so they know where they're going and they don't get nervous about not remembering.
What are the most important things that you try to get or feel when you flat ride a horse? Well,
I think flatting the horses is very important. I actually, when you all came up, Lisa Wilcox, who's a top level dressage rider and has been in the Olympics for dressage, but she doesn't train them to do the fancy tricks that they do for dressage, but she gets the horses very rideable. I've had a lot of different horses that the less rideable they are, the more difficult it is going to be able to ride them around the course. So I think it's very important to get your horse responsive to your aids. But I think the flat work is extremely important. They have to be sensitive to both lengthening and shortening when you need them to. They have to be responsive to your leg aids, to your hand aids. And the biggest thing is making sure that the horses stay in front of your leg, because for the jump, the power comes from the hind end. And when we do the hunters for a long time, even with them, you don't want them too on their forehand, but they go a little longer and lower. And you have plenty of ground line in front of the jumps, and they still have time to get their front ends out of the way. With the jumpers, they really need to be back on their hind end, so it makes the jump easier. That's where their power comes from, and that's where their push comes from. And a lot of horses that I rode when I was younger that didn't have all the scope in the world, you can develop that scope just by the way they carry themselves. If you get them energized and get the spring loaded behind, they're going to get a lot more power both to go up and across. So I think it's very important for the horse's balance to make sure that they flat correctly and learn to carry themselves in front of the leg and with their hind end up underneath them. And to be flexible. You know, you want to get them flexible both left and right so they turn easily. And Lisa's done a phenomenal job helping me with the flat work with a lot of the horses, not just the Grand Prix horses, but in developing some of the young horses. She, like I said, she doesn't do it just for, you know, the Grand Prix horses, and she doesn't do it more for what the dressage tests they're going to do. It's more to get the rideability nice for what we're doing. And I think as the sport gets more intricate as far as the rideability in between, the more important it is. But I've always been fascinated by flat work, and when I was young, we had people at the barn that did dressage, and I always tried to watch and learn from that. And I still, to this day, will go and watch when Lisa works, and it's very interesting to me to watch someone different work the horses, and whether, even with the young ones, I had a cowboy last year that came and was helping break some of the young horses. And people think of a cowboy and that's all they do is ride around Western and the neck. He actually did a lot of flat work and a lot of dressage work with the horses when he was breaking the young ones. And because at this stage I'm not breaking them anymore. So, because I've broken a few too many things, like you've said. But it's very interesting. He does do leg yields. He does do getting them responsive forward and back and making them listen and just working on the rideability. But it doesn't always matter what type of riding you're doing, but it's making sure that the horses are responsive to your aids. And you need that.
We've got one last question. It might not be the easiest one, but if there was one horse on the current circuit that you could take to ride the Grand Prix, which one would you pick?
Oh gosh, there's so many.
A horse that you could take.
Just a horse right now, or from years ago, or from...
Yeah, a horse on the actual circuit that's riding that you would love to be riding.
Well, I have to say that caracole that Carl just got, whether I could ride it or not, or I would try my best to learn to ride it, but that just looks like a fun horse to ride. She loves her job. She's always looking for the jumps. She's one that tries her heart out to miss the jumps as much as any horse I've ever seen. And I've seen her go in a lot of different classes, and I liked her since she was a young horse with Julien.
With Julien, yes.
Yeah, no, I watched her. I actually had asked about her, but it was way out of but I had asked about her when she was a young horse. Nicholas, I actually asked about the mare, and I figured she was going to. But when she even first started, she just is... When the horse has that kind of heart and desire, and she just looks like she loves what she does, that would probably be a phenomenal horse to ride, and just looks like a lot of fun. And the other one, I hate to just on, but that other one he just bought, that Foxy, is another horse that looks unbelievable.
Carl is a lucky guy.
No, he's probably got two of my favorite horses around at the moment. But there's a lot of good ones. I mean, there's so many nice horses, but those just, they have nice blood. They're modern types. They try. You never see them go in the ring where you say they didn't try, or they always. It's the same thing you look for in a person: heart and desire, and they both look like they have all the heart and desire and try in the world, and that's something that I would look for in a person and in a horse, and they're honest. You know, they're just honest as the day is long.
Margie, thank you so much for the time you granted us.
It's been thank you for having me.
Really nice pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Nice to be here.